Hi folks, welcome back. Very warm welcome back. So Emily Oden here from the London Buddhist Centre, live from the London Buddhist Centre. So very good to have had you along with us today. You might have joined in earlier on this Sangha Day where we are celebrating, rejoicing in and evoking these qualities of friendship, of love, of camaraderie, all of the things that we associate with Sangha. So I really hope you've been enjoying it so far. So a definite highlight of the day for me is the keynote talks, and it becomes an extra special highlight today because we have Jnanavaca joining us in the Shrine Room to give a keynote talk on why spiritual community is so important in such a divided world, the importance of spiritual community in a divided world. And of course, we are living in a divided world, aren't we? There's no denying that. We have become both politically divided, but also our sense of community has started to become frayed, and we've become more divided and atomized and individualized in that sense as well. So I'm really looking forward to hear what Jnanavaca has to say. And just by word of introducing Jnanavaca a little bit, I'm very lucky to live with Jnanavaca up in one of the communities upstairs, Jnanavaca upstairs. And I was joking with Jnanavaca during the week, wasn't I? I was saying I wasn't going into Jnanavaca with any thorny issues anymore, because what happens is that you go to Jnanavaca with a thorny issue, and I have some obstinate position I'm utterly determined that to stick to, and you go into Jnanavaca and he starts by completely agreeing with you that that's the totally the right way to proceed, and then gingerly takes you by the hand to the point where you didn't want to be. The one thing you didn't want to do, you end up agreeing to do. Having talked to Jnanavaca, so I said, there's no way I'm going to Jnanavaca. Maybe we should just skip. I should just go and ask him what's the best thing to do without him having to sort of take me through the process of getting me around to it. But he's very excellent communicator in that sense, Jnanavaca, and also I really just want to rejoice as well in this, particularly in how much he upholds this jewel of Sangha. Jnanavaca's door is always open, always seeing people, irrespective of how busy he is. He always makes time, and I think so many of us around the Sangha here have benefited from that and benefited from his friendship as well. So just by a little word of introduction to Jnanavaca. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Jnanavaca.
Very good, thank you, Emily, and very warm welcome from me to our 2020 Sangha Day. Of course, you may be watching this recorded, so in which case, sorry you weren't here, as it were. But whatever you are, I really am pleased that we can virtually sort of meet as a Sangha. And what a peculiar year it's been. But one of the most positive aspects for me of this whole pandemic situation has been that we've connected with each other as a Sangha all over the world. And that for me has been one of the most positive aspects of what has been a tragic situation for so many people all over the world. It's been a real privilege to sit here in this shrine room at the London Buddhist Centre and be able to talk to people in India, to be able to talk to people in Mexico, to be able to talk to people in North America, to be able to talk to people from all over the world in their homes, as it were. And so I'm very pleased to be sitting here, to be invited to talk to you about Sangha in a divided world, as Amna Yoden said. But I don't want to start with the divided world. In a way, the divided world is very much with us, too much with us. I want to start with, in a way, the birth of the Sangha. The birth of the Sangha in the Buddhist tradition, Sangha meaning community. The birth of the Buddhist community was when the Buddha first communicated his enlightenment experience to others. And he communicated it initially to 5 friends of his, 5 fellow seekers who had practiced with him austerities in the period of the Buddha's life when he believed that mortifying the flesh, torturing the body, would lead to the liberation of the mind. And of course the Buddha decided that it didn't, but these 5 friends thought that the Buddha was a coward, a hedonist for abandoning that path of austerity, and they abandoned him. Later, of course, the Buddha, after his enlightenment, reached out to them, went to Sarnath, about 100 miles away from Bodh Gaya. He went there on foot to communicate the Dharma to them. And it was only when the Dharma was communicated to them, when they said that they took the Buddha as a refuge, when they committed themselves to the Buddha and the Dharma, that the Sangha was born. The Sangha refuge didn't exist until those 5 first disciples became disciples. They were then the Sangha. So that you then had the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Traditionally, in Eastern countries, well, from the time of the Buddha, the reason that we celebrate Sangha Day at this time of year in November is that traditionally the bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, the monks and nuns of following the Buddha, would have had to shelter during the rainy season. The monsoon season in India, they would have had to shelter in, in semi sort of permanent huts and abodes. They would have had to sit out the rainy season and be on retreat during that time. The Buddha himself would be on retreat during that time. And at the end of the rains, they could gather again, they could meet again, they could be a Sangha again. And that's why we celebrate Sangha Day in November, as it were, near the full moon in November, or on the full moon in November. But really, the Sangha that we're remembering goes right back to those 5 disciples, the first 5 disciples who became, they followed the Buddha, they became enlightened, and they became the first Sangha. Actually, the Sangha expanded pretty quickly after those first 5. I won't be able to go into the sort of history of that, but pretty soon after the first 5, it became 65. And those early disciples were encouraged by the Buddha to go off in all different directions and teach the Dharma. And of course, we're the beneficiaries. We're in a lineage going right back to those first disciples of the Buddha. So I was thinking, why is Sangha so important for us? I mean, today. Today, as in, on Sangha Day in 2020, when many of us are not able to physically meet with not just Sangha members, but with family and with other friends. But not just in 2020 on this rather unusual Sangha Day. Why is Sangha so important for us in our lives, in our current contemporary times? I think that the Dharma is, for most of us, not enough. That's what I experience. The Dharma, unless you're an exceptional human being, I believe that Bhante Sangharakshita was an exceptional human being, and he seemed to have gone a heck of a long way in his Dharma life without any Sangha to speak of, not in the sense at least that I experience. But for me, the Dharma wouldn't be enough, and I know that for a fact because I was inspired by the Dharma as a young teenager. Around the age of 13, 14, I came across some books on Zen, popular books on Zen. I also read Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. We had some Buddhist monks come to my school, I seem to dimly remember, and I was very impressed with them. I thought of myself as a Buddhist, certainly by the time I was 17. I thought of myself as a Buddhist. And for the next 10 years, even though I might have been inspired by Buddhism, I didn't meet the Sangha, actually 11 years. I didn't meet the Sangha till I was about 28. And when I look back, my inspiration for the Dharma amounted to nothing apart from reading a few books and talking to my mates in the pub, often at length, late at night, lecturing them as to why Buddhism was the only way to live and the only true philosophy and the only, answer to everything. I didn't do anything else. And to be honest, I wasn't completely aware that you could do anything else unless you became a monk or a nun. And I wasn't prepared to become a monk, and I kind of thought, unless I can become a monk, I'm not going to be able to practice the Dharma much more than read about it. In those days, pre-internet, you couldn't easily find the Sangha, you couldn't easily learn to meditate. It wasn't until I met people who were practicing the Dharma that I knew that I could practice the Dharma. I think most of us need exemplars. We need exemplars. We need somebody to show to us that it's possible. Even the Buddha-to-be, Siddhartha Gautama, before he became a Buddha, needed a personified exemplar, a real person, exemplifying the quest. In his case, that was the wandering holy man that became known to us as the fourth sight. He needed a seeker. And that wandering holy man, for all we know, wasn't really enlightened, fully enlightened as the Buddha became, at least according to tradition. He was just a seeker. But that was enough to inspire Siddhartha Gautama to leave the palace, to embark on his quest. So even somebody as gifted as the Buddha, before he was enlightened, needed inspiration in human form. I think that's what we need. I think images of the Buddha, for many people, they do inspire very, very deeply. They do to me, actually, but not when I first came along. I think we need human beings. Recently, I was fortunate enough to meet actually the first man that I met who was a Buddhist, a man called Clive Sherlock, who's still living, thankfully, and he's a psychologist and teaches at Oxford, and I met him at Oxford. I was a young student. He was, to me, a much, much older man. He was probably, he's younger than I am now. And he was my first Buddhist teacher, and he was like, for me, the equivalent of the fourth sight. He didn't have, or I didn't find in his group, a community, but I did have him as an inspiration. And recently on Zoom, we reconnected after 35, 36 years, and I was able to say thank you to him for being that inspiration. But really, it wasn't until till I came across Triratna, that I found a community, a whole network of practitioners who, within which I could find friendship, peer friendship, and I could find people that I could look up to, teachers. It wasn't really actually until I came on a retreat, went on a retreat, that I actually really felt that my heart had joined in this network of practitioners. Until then, I used to come to the LBC, the London Buddhist Centre, and hang out in the bookshop because I was frightened that all these very, very friendly people were really just part of some weird cult. And I wasn't even sure that it was Buddhist. They didn't look like monks. Well, they weren't. And were they really Buddhist, or were they just, I don't know, riding some sort of wave of Buddhism and secretly just out to recruit me into some sort of weird cult? And I couldn't quite, as it were, open my heart until I went on retreat. And then I found that my heart, not once opened, it couldn't turn back, as it were. You can't have a turning back heart, but you know what I mean. I couldn't look back. And that was because, not least because, I met people that inspired me, and also people that I could relate to. So personally, I feel I couldn't have done it without Sangha, without community. I couldn't have been a practitioner. And I don't think many of us could have done. Now, when I say Sangha as a support for practice, that's what I had sort of written down in my notes, Sangha as a support for practice. I kind of mean, I primarily mean friendship as inspiration on the path. Friendship as inspiration on the path. By support for practice, I don't mean that Sangha, the community, the fellowship of the Buddha's disciples, I don't mean that the Sangha, somehow are going to solve my problems and my life's problems. The Sangha isn't a support group in that way. They might act at times as one, because friends do, but primarily I think of Sangha as fellowship on the path, an inspiration, so that I can practice, I can learn to be more kind, more aware, more empathic, that I can practice the Buddha's teachings more truly, so that I can transform my consciousness. And I do believe that all of us have the potential to completely transform our consciousness. And Sangha is an inspiration for me in that way. I also think that without Sangha, something very important is missing in practice, because as well as being a support, I think Sangha is a practice. Sangha becomes not just a context for practice, like, you know, a supportive environment for meditation. I don't just mean Sangha as a supportive context for practice. I think that other people become our practice. When we start to reach out to others and befriend other people, when we start to become close to them, when we start to open up to those people, when we start to reveal ourselves to other people, confess to other people, when we start to forgive other people for being imperfect, when we experience the forgiveness from others, Sangha becomes practice. Sangha becomes practice. I've been fortunate enough to live with, Amla Yodin and Jnanavaca and others in a community above the London Buddhist Centre. I've lived there for 25 years. Paramabandhu and Maitreya Bandhu started that community, Samadhyavasa, and I joined about a year later. They're still there and are amongst my closest friends. Friends is too weak a word. They're like a second self. They're like, even brothers are too weak a word. They are like a second self. Sometimes I sort of think to myself, what would Maitreya Bandhu do? Or can I evoke the Paramabandhu within? Can I evoke that voice? Because I need that voice of sanity and reason and calm that Paramabandhu is. Can I evoke that something of the inspiration and love and creativity that Maitreya Bandhu brings to almost every situation he encounters? I carry internalized, as best I can, internalized versions of Maitreya Bandit and Parama Bandit. And then there's Subhadramati, who's sitting as part of the technical team here, or part of the Sangha Day team here. And Subhadramati is like, again, sister seems too weak a word in some ways, but she is. She's like a sister. And we've grown up together, and we've fought together, and we've worked together. And I don't think there's anything that I can't say to Subhadramati. We talk about the Dharma together, we talk about our lives together. But more than that, we share an ideal together. And it's that unites us. That's what unites all of us in the Sangha. We can be very, very different from each other, but it's that shared ideal which unites us. But mainly what I was trying to say is that Sangha is also practice. Sangha is also practice. If you live closely with people, you start to see that they're not as wonderful and perfect, even though they're order members. You start to see, well, I've disappointed so many people in my life, particularly when they start to get closer to me. And then they think, at first they might think he gives inspiring talks, and then they get close to me, and particularly if they move in to the community, and they have to forgive me for my silliness and my inappropriateness and my clumsiness. Just yesterday I was making breakfast. I make smoothies. I try and have a big sort of smoothie for breakfast. I had headphones on. I was listening to some music. It was a late breakfast. It was a sort of brunch. And we have this sort of automatic water thing. It's not a kettle. It's called a bibo. It delivers you cold and hot water. And I put my my mug with a tea bag under, and pressed the button. All this hot water was streaming out while I carried on making a smoothie. And Matt, who I live with, came in, and I had my headphones on, Bach, Partita number 2, which is very good. But and all the water was going all over the place. Hot boiling water was pouring out from this bibo, had overflowed the mug, was all over the place. And he just sort of looked at me quizzically like, who are you? Who are you, this senior order member that I'm living with? Was the look on his face. I couldn't really hear him. Anyway, people have to forgive me. Sangha becomes a practice in learning to appreciate human beings regardless of their shortcomings. And I think that that's a very, very valuable teaching, that actually whether you're part of the Sangha or not, we all have to learn. So Sangha is a practice, and partly that's because Sangha isn't... Sangha as it's lived, at least in Triratna, is an aspirational Sangha. It's not the ideal Sangha. It's full of people aspiring to be Buddhas. But myself, I'm a long, long way from that, from realizing that ideal. So it's an aspirational Sangha. That means it's imperfect. And Ratnagosha, who's a very wise teacher and friend, I can remember him once giving a talk here in this room and saying that this was when he was chair of the London Buddhist Centre, and he said that most people that he meets in the Sangha have two main obstacles that they need to overcome. And those obstacles bring much suffering. And he said that the first obstacle was thinking that they needed to be perfect, and the second obstacle was thinking that other people needed to be perfect. And that sort of expectation that other people need to be perfect and I need to be perfect is gradually eroded by confrontation with real practitioners, with real people who are aspiring. That's why Sangha is a practice. It's this meeting of the ideal and the real. This ideal and the real, and the two have to come together. When you go for refuge to the Buddha, when you encounter the Buddha, you just get the ideal, personified, but there's the ideal. You encounter the Dharma, and there are these beautiful teachings, and Bhante particularly unfolds the Dharma so clearly, in such an inspiring way. You get the ideal of metta, for example, just to take one thing. Such a beautiful ideal. You can't argue with it. Nobody would argue with unconditional love for all sentient existence. You couldn't argue with that ideal. But what do you do with it if you don't feel it all the time? It's when the ideal meets the real human being that in a way, practice starts to be transformative. And the Sangha is that context, at least the Sangha as a lived community of practitioners, of aspiring practitioners. They're real. They're real people aspiring to be Buddhas. And that is very, very important if you're an aspiring practitioner. If you're as I was, an armchair Buddhist, as I used to be as a teenager, an armchair Buddhist pontificating about non-duality to all my friends, particularly after a few pints. If you're an armchair Buddhist, I don't think you need the Sangha, actually. And the Sangha might just be a bit of a disappointing disappointing sort of fact that somehow is a blot on the ideal. But if you're an aspiring practitioner that's committed to transformation, then I believe that Sangha is very, very necessary. Without that, without other people who are also aspiring, without becoming close to them, I think that Buddhism easily turns into subtle conceit. It becomes, if we're not careful, as it did for me as a young man, one more badge that I can wear that says, look how interesting a person I am, and I can show off about it, and I can even feel good about it myself, better about myself, because not only am I a great guy, now I'm a Buddhist. And that's a very crude way of putting that sort of egotistical appropriation that the Dharma can give us. But at a more subtle level, as you start to practice the Dharma, the danger of appropriation of insights and higher experiences and higher states of consciousness, the danger of appropriation is always there. The danger of egotistical appropriation is there all the way to enlightenment, until all traces of self-centeredness are completely transcended. So it's Sangha that keeps us real. Does that make sense? I know this because even on retreat, or particularly when I'm on my own, on solitary retreat, I can have very pleasant meditative experiences, and even some degree of realization of the truth of the Sangha, of the truth of the Dharma. But when I meet my friends, and when I'm clumsy or rude or inconsiderate or self-centered or I don't know, secretly just having that last piece of cake, when I'm doing that, it's the vision meets what needs to be transformed. And that's where the magic happens. Even the vision isn't enough without real transformation. And I think that without other people around us who are also practicing, it's possible to delude ourselves. It's possible to sort of hide in our vision, even. So Sangha is practice. I want to move on to talk about what the Sangha isn't. Well, first of all, I want to say that the Sangha doesn't really exist without the Dharma. If you're not practicing the Dharma as best you can, or, to whatever degree you're able and willing, if there isn't any practice of the Dharma, you're not a part of the Sangha. At least for the period when you're not practicing. It's not like you join a club. It's not like you get some sort of membership. Even if you become a mitra, even if you become an ordained member of the Sangha, unless you're going for refuge to a transcendental ideal, moving towards Buddhahood, in a way, you're not then part of the Sangha at that time. Sangha's a sort of, it's not a static thing. It's something that you participate in to the degree that you're practicing, to the degree that I'm practicing. It's there's no Sangha without the Dharma. I think if, fortunately in Triratna, there's always, I think, enough people practicing, sincerely practicing, for it to be a living Sangha. So even when I'm not practicing, and I'm not always practicing, I've got hooked on Netflix at the moment, and I'm not always practicing. Friends of mine are. And then sometimes I'll be the one that's practicing. And I think in Triratna there's enough of us always practicing for it to be a living Sangha, to lift each other up. But if there was nobody practicing, it wouldn't be a Sangha. If we lose touch with the Dharma, it's not a Sangha. What it descends into is a group, what Bhante calls a group. He has a particular connotation for the word group that's all his own. Sangharakshita has coined the word group in a very particular way. What he means by a group is a collection of people who are all signed up to a common ideology or a common kind of cause. They're conforming to a common norm, but they're not trying to grow as individuals. They're not trying to grow as beings who are trying to transform their consciousness. They're in some sort of stasis as members of some sort of club. And the Sangha isn't that. The Sangha is very, very much, it's only actually about people trying to, it's a group, it's a collection of people trying to become Buddhas, trying to transcend their limitations, trying to become more individual. Bhante called it a free association of individuals. It's not people who are card-carrying members called Buddhists, who are following some sort of cause. It's not that. And I think we have to kind of, maybe that's kind of obvious to you, but I think we have in Triratna, there's always a tension. There's always a tension because to be a living Sangha, we've always also got to be in relation to the world, because otherwise we just become a closed community with walls around us. We can't have that. We've got to be in relation to the world. But the world won't relate on the basis of the Dharma. The world tends to see collectives as groups, and groups in a worldly sense tend to be socio-political groupings that relate primarily, and this is a huge generalization, I know, but they primarily relate in terms of rights and power, and which group has more power over another. They relate in terms of oppressor and oppressed. They relate in terms of conflict and competition. And you see this in the world all over, be it in terms of nation states, be it in terms of races or power groups within a society of any kind. Those ways of banding together, which human beings have done since there were human beings, that's different from a collection of individuals, of people trying to be more and more truly alive, truly what it is to be human, trying to move towards an ideal that's transcendent. It's very, very different. Bhante termed this, coined this term group, and then contrasted it with the individual. And again, he had a very particular notion of what the individual was. I want to read you some of the characteristics of what the individual is according to Bhante. This is from a list, and I can't read you them all. There's 33 characteristics, and I haven't got time. But these are just some of them: courage, responsibility, unselfishness, inspiration, ardour, friendliness, joyfulness, compassion, imperturbability, receptivity, honesty, sensitivity, spontaneity, creativity, mindfulness, fidelity, imagination, responsibility, aloneness, initiative, insight, and cooperativeness. I mean, that's what Bhante was saying an individual is. That's what we're aspiring to be. And then when individuals come together, they form Sangha. None of those qualities is saying, we're members of a club and that we are demanding equal rights and recognitions as some member of another club. It's a very different notion to the notion of power relationships. I think we have to just be aware of relating as a group within the Sangha. I think particularly social media. I mean, I try and avoid social media. I'm not completely abstinent from it. I have a Facebook account. But I think social media particularly, and I'm old enough to remember a time before social media. I think social media, I know it's not, this is again a generalization, but I think that it particularly encourages group thinking and group ways of behaving. I tend not to post on my Facebook account. A few years ago I did, and I posted some photographs. They were completely innocent photographs of a leaf, one autumn, innocuous photographs that really, I mean, they were lovely, a leaf against the sky. And I became obsessed with looking for how many likes I had on my pictures. And I sort of made a promise to myself not to post things, at least unless they were going to further the spreading of the Dharma in some way. Because I just didn't like the effect that it had on my own mind. They were beautiful pictures, and it was good to share beauty. I'm not saying it wasn't. It's just that my mind, certainly at that time, I just didn't feel I was enough of an individual not to keep referring back to Facebook to see if I got the approval that I wanted from the group in the form of clicks. Yeah? And goodness, I hope that I don't spend much more of my life doing that sort of thing. But yeah, we do want approval, don't we? We want approval from the group. From whichever group we identify with or groups we identify with. And I think we've just got to watch, particularly in a time of social media, particularly at a time when we can't meet face to face very easily, that we don't just easily succumb to group thinking and group behaviour, no matter how innocent or even idealistic that group might seem to be. We have to be relating to each other on the basis of individuality as individuals who are aspiring to some of the qualities, if not all the qualities: courage, responsibility, honesty, sensitivity, etc. And we have to relate to individuals beyond our superficial conditioning, be that gender or race or class or caste or nationality. The Sangha aspires to be a collective that transcends all of our conditioning so that we can relate on the highest possible basis. Bhante said, a group is united by its lowest common denominator, a spiritual community by its highest common factor. A group is united by its lowest common denominator, a spiritual community by its highest common factor. And the highest common factor for us as a Buddhist community is enlightenment. That's what unites us, that aspiration, that potential that there is in each human being to achieve Buddhahood. That's what unites us. And we need to be relating, I believe, constantly on that basis as potential Buddhas. I don't always do that. I fall back into group behaviour myself. I'm talking in aspirational terms here. And the teaching of the Buddha, let me just read you something that Bhante said. He said that the teaching of the Buddha was concerned with the development of the individual. Admittedly, that development had, through ethics, a social dimension. But the Buddha was not concerned with something much wider, the whole realm of sentient being. He puts that in quotes. Something much wider, the whole realm of sentient being, in opposition, as it were, to the individual. He was not concerned with the development of the group as such, or the well-being of the group as such. He was concerned with the development of individuals as individuals. I think this is a very important point because there's so many problems in the world. I mean, I'm not going to list the problems. You know the problems that the world faces. And I'm not saying that Buddhism alone can solve the economic problems, the social problems, the environmental problems of the world. I'm not as naive as that. At the same time, I don't think that socio-political solutions to those problems, even if they're well applied, are going to be enough. I think that what is needed, what's always needed, is a transformation of consciousness. Because at root, the problems of the world, social, national, environmental, they come down to limitations of consciousness. They come down to our unenlightened minds that are shot through with greed and craving and desire, and with hatred and aversion and ill will, and with spiritual ignorance. So a fundamental solution to the human situation has to be at the level of a transformation of consciousness, a transcendence of limited consciousness to something vast and unlimited. That potential is there in the human heart and human mind. And without that, any social solution is going to be limited at best. And if we're not careful, we just get into more conflict as one group says that they've got the right answer and gets into conflict with another group who thinks the right answer is something other than that. So I think as a Sangha, primarily what we can offer is we can offer a context where individuals can transform themselves in that way. And if one person transforms themselves in that way, then they have an effect on all that they come into contact with. So it's not just a limited, closed kind of self-centered transformation. It then ripples out into a sphere of influence that's much, much wider. So I think Bante's gift to us, he's given us many, many gifts. But one of the most radical is a creation of a new Sangha, an order and a community that are radically attempting to practice the Dharma in the modern world. That gift, I think, is truly, truly extraordinary, even in the Buddhist world. Now, fortunately, we're not alone, and there are many other Buddhist Sanghas. But in my mind, Bante's given us a very unique Sangha, because he said that this Sangha, the Triratna Sangha, isn't defined by lifestyle. It's not defined by whether you become a monk or a nun, or whether you're a lay practitioner. It's defined by commitment to the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha. It's defined by our going for refuge. It's defined by the strength of our aspiration and the strength of our commitment towards that aspiration. It's not limited also to one national grouping. Often Buddhism in the East is limited, the Sanghas are limited to particular national groupings. If you go to Bodh Gaya, it's lovely actually at Bodh Gaya, you see all these Sanghas coming together around the Bodhi tree. But often you get the Sri Lankan Sangha and the Thai Sangha and the Tibetan Sangha. And Bante's given us something unique in saying that no, Sangha is not only not limited by lifestyle, it's not limited by anything like nationality or race or even cultural conditioning. It's not limited by gender. In the Buddhist world, there's still, for women, there's still a real struggle to be ordained and recognised in an equal way to men who have been ordained. And Bante's transcended that, and he said, look, gender isn't important in terms of enlightenment. Whatever gender, or even if you don't identify with a gender, it's not important in terms of enlightenment. The qualities that I read out, honesty, courage, responsibility, they don't recognise gender or nationality or caste or class. He's given us a Sangha in a very principial way, in a very, very principial way. That's very important to me. That's very, very important. I want to start wrapping up now, and I want to say something about Sangha in its ideal form, because I've talked in a way about us as an aspirational Sangha, and often we fall short. I certainly fall short of the ideal of what it is to be a true individual. But I think there's something really important about the nature of enlightenment that is to do with the collective. It's sometimes said that the Buddha's enlightenment was only fully, as it were, complete when he communicated it to other people, and when they got it, when they became enlightened. There's something about enlightened consciousness that you can't say is in a sense, you can't say it's individual or collective. Enlightened consciousness has transcended the very basic duality of me and you, of self and other. So if that's the case, it really doesn't make sense for enlightened consciousness to be like limited to one body, one being. It can't be confined in that way, or even talked about in that way. A natural outpouring of the enlightened mind is to reach out in love and in solidarity and in harmony with other beings. There's a realization in the enlightened mind which I can only kind of point to from my own much more lower level of realization. There's a realization in the enlightened mind that knows that physical form is not who we really are. And it knows that individual consciousness, my personality, my consciousness, my conditioning, my memories, my experiences, is not who we really are. That the nature of our mind at its most essential transcends the physical form, and it transcends the individual mind. And because it transcends that, it recognizes that it's the same nature in all life, in all human beings. Us unenlightened ones don't recognize that. An enlightened being would recognize the potential, the seed of enlightenment in all human beings. And there would be no sense of ultimate separation at the level of physical form or at the level of personal conditioning. In the tradition, there's the Buddha has three bodies. He has his physical body, and then he has his enlightened mind as universal consciousness, which has no form whatsoever, as reality itself. That's the Dharmakaya. But there's another body of the Buddha, which is called the Sambodhakaya. It's the archetypal form of the Buddha, the visionary form of the Buddha. And it's also, the Sambodhakaya is said to be, it's the body of mutual enjoyment, it's the body of bliss, it's the body in which the Buddha communes or communicates with other archetypal Buddhas, with other archetypal forms. Enlightenment has communication, if you can call it communication, woven into it. It's an intrinsic part of the enlightened mind to reach out and communicate with other enlightened beings, or indeed with unenlightened beings. But I don't know what it would be like for one enlightened being to communicate with another enlightened being when neither of them have any sense of individual separate existence. I mean, that's bonkers, isn't it? And all that you can point to is these visionary forms of light who are distinct. There's the Buddha Amitabha, distinct from the Buddha Shakyamuni, and yet not really separate. All you can point to is these visions that are said to be conjoined in bliss, who communicate bliss. It's a transcendental vision that our Sangha aspires to. That's the Sangha of the Buddhas. That's the Sangha that we go for refuge to. That's the Sangha that we bow down to. That's the Sangha that we pay homage to, the Sangha of the enlightened ones. For us, for me, Sangha exists in human form on the level of practice and support. It exists in the sense of me aspiring to be more of an individual and relating to others as individuals, me trying not to fall into group consciousness and helping others not to fall into group consciousness, and me bowing down in reverence to the archetypal Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, who I believe exist in a very real way, but in a way that is not conceptually graspable for me. They exist like forces in the universe. They exist also as the true nature of your mind and of my mind, and as our potential through which we one day will be able to realize true meaning and the true meaning of Sangha. Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you very much. Very good. So I'm going to hand back to Amla Yoden, who's going to say some concluding remarks and tell us what's going to happen next.
Yes, thank you so much, Jnanavaca. Really, really appreciated that talk. I won't try and sum it up, but one of the things I will say is I really liked this evocation of Sangha as the point that ideal meets reality, that vision meets individuals as they are, and the point that transformation happens, and that we're helped in that way to transform, that we help each other to transform. So I really like that idea, and I'm here to just to say thank you to Jnanavaca, but also to make a request of you as well, watching at home, because one of the things I think that really marks that practice of Sangha is generosity. I think one of the ways that Bhante has talked about Sangha, or one of the ways that Bhante has said Sangha is exemplified, is the giving of gifts. One of the ways we can recognize Sangha is the giving of gifts. And so generosity, very, very important from the perspective of Sangha. Now, of course, here at the London Buddhist Centre, we've been totally dependent on your generosity ever since lockdown. Particularly since lockdown, of course, we're dependent on your generosity at all times, but particularly since lockdown, we've been dependent on your generosity. And so we're asking for you to be generous again. And one of the things that we've asked for in this retreat is we've set a target of £6,000 for the retreat. Now we're halfway there. But one of the ways that you could look at that is we're halfway off it as well. So, so we're halfway there, but we're halfway off it. Vision of £6,000 meet reality of £3,000 deficit. So we want £3,000 and we want you to give it to us. We can hit our target now if one of you gives us £3,000. Failing that, how many of you needed? 30 of you could give us 100, or 60 of you could give us 50, and we'd be there. Reality and vision would be non-dual, would be totally aligned. So if at all possible, particularly if you've been partaking in the week's events here that all have been put on free, and that's very, very important to us that we can reach out in that same spirit of generosity and give things for free. All the teachers, of course, here at the LBC give their time for free in teaching, and we'd ask that if you can and if you're moved to, a donation of £50, if very, very helpful, but of course more if you're in a position to do it as well. We really, really appreciate it. So we want to make up those £3,000, and we really want to hit our target of 6,000. So we really ask if you can. So Jnanavaca is going to pop up the link in the chat box now if he hasn't already done it, and you can make a donation there. So what we're going to do now is we're going to, we'll have a little bit of a break. We'll have the Mitra ceremonies as the next big event, the culmination of our activity here at Sangha Day, and we'll have that at 7 o'clock. So do tune in for that. That's going to be on Zoom, and you'll get the link for that on the website, on the London Buddhist Centre online website. So do tune in for that. One of the highlights here of our schedule at the centre is Mitra ceremonies, seeing people step into a deeper commitment and a commitment to their friends in the Sangha as well. So we really look forward to that. So come in, join for that, 7 o'clock, and we really look forward to seeing you there. Until then, see you soon. Great. Well done.